we would provide internet to people who could not afford it. It wasn't accessibility, there was accessibility, but there was an affordability question as well. So that's an example of technology in a tech environment, architecting the environment to make the connectivity happen, and then having from a human lens where people can consume it and they could use it for content. And at the time we were all at home, so there was homeschooling, etc. So that was very rewarding as a public servant.
Welcome back to the IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Peter Rodechen, CEO of Tolin Tech Subservices and partner of Asia Growth Partners. And I'm here with our co-host, Eric Valenza, CEO of the new Asia Growth Partners organization. We're both located in Shanghai, connected to our guest, Lawrence Eta, currently located in Saudi Arabia. And Lawrence is quite a prominent technology visionary. We seldomly meet people like you here. And the former CTO of the city of Toronto, which is something very, very interesting to us. You have played a crucial role in advancing the city's digital transformation. And Lawrence holds over 23 years of experience in various industries and is recognized for his commitment to leveraging technology for societal advancement and creating foundations for innovation. And this is something we do not see every day, that we have people that connect technology with societal advancement. And I see you have also written a book, Bridging Worlds, a journey of technology, leadership, and public service. Very interesting. I still have to get to that point in my life. So I hope you find this conversation valuable. Please rate us and feel free to share your comments.
Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Valenza.
So now, in terms of the question, I got 7 sections, Lawrence. So let's first talk about maybe your background and motivation. Maybe add something which I missed during your introduction. If there is anything you would like to add, you can do that now.
Thank you so much, Peter and Eric. Thank you to your audience for the opportunity to have this conversation. I'm looking forward to it. I'm a global digital transformation thought leader. Part of my background is that I've lived in 5 countries, various continents. I was born in Nigeria, moved to the UK, where I had part of my education, and then moved to Canada, spent time in the US, and now I'm in the Middle East in Saudi Arabia. And my evolution through technology has certainly been from a technical aspect. So I started very strongly in the network infrastructure world to lead it into an executive level, which then focus on cities. But I do have a private sector background as well. So and I think that has leveraged me very well in terms of the private and public service. I'm now in a part of the world where there is a rapid acceleration of digital transformation in the Middle East, and specifically in Saudi Arabia. So looking forward to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Could you share a bit about your journey from technologist to becoming a CTO of Toronto? How did you get there?
Yes, it started off very much with my educational background. I actually studied a degree called Bachelor of Science in Technology Management. And at that stage, there was only a choice of computer science. So programming, I decided, was not where I was going to focus. It was more management information systems. I liked the combination of computer-aided drawing, computer-aided manufacturing, systems analysis. And then with the technology of the technical aspects, I did do some programming aspects. So from that, I generally then built my career in terms of working from the ground up. Most people may know there are 7 layers of technology: the application, the presentation, session, transport, network, data link area. So I felt walking through each of those areas were very important. So I did a lot of network configuration, past when you were bringing ISDN, frame relay, a lot of the telecommunications industry. I spent time working for telecommunications provider in Canada. and also in the US. So that really had a good grasp. And you're talking in the early 2000s when the internet was really coming out from the formation. So 1 meg modems all the way back. So I did a lot of that work. But what I really had passion was how the technology was going to integrate with humans. So I would normally go out with the pre-sales they would sell in the private sector the technology, the connectivity we wanted at the time. And what we were building, which would be called the cloud now, it was, I worked for a company, they had 5 data centers across the world connecting it. And then from there, I went into the field of looking at how you're bringing telecommunications to TV. A lot of the telecommunications provider will now bring in television in terms of, I know that we're going to maybe have a technical conversation, but to some of your audience, it's called the PPPoE, point-to-point protocol over Ethernet, which was connecting data as well as voice, RJ11 to RJ45. So I started very much in that networking technical domain. But what I quickly then realized was that the value was understanding some aspects of finance, accounting, leading people, human resources, that aspect. So I did an MBA, did a couple of MBA, an Executive Masters of Business Administration and a Master of Management, which started to broaden me more into now letting the technical people sort of lay through. And I would look at the business case, the value that was provided in the sector. And so I found that work quite interesting, and it led me through now to be able to communicate fairly technical items into items that could be consumed by the business stakeholders at that time in the private sector. One of the things I was really passionate as well was architecture. I felt as building, if you're building a house today, you have an architect that designs the house. Technology, digital infrastructure needs to be that. So I went very strongly on an architectural path. So that was very good. And then as I went on, I started getting into leadership role. I worked in Canada. I worked in one of the top 54 pension plans, started to move them online in the sort of 2000s, document management, and I worked. And so through that journey and all of that experience, and then I was essentially headhunted and recruited to take on the Deputy Chief Information Officer of infrastructure in the 4th largest city in Canada, which is the 4th largest city in North America, should I say. It's the largest city in Canada. Then 2 years from that, just before the pandemic, we changed the role from CIO, Chief Information Officer, to Chief Technology Officer, and I became the first Chief Technology Officer as the leading technology executive in the city of Toronto.
Very interesting. So you went all the way from infrastructure up to applications, basically, where it touches the people and the IT, right?
Correct. So all levels of the stream, databases, back-end, front-end, infrastructure. I've gone up and down the stack, which is important in building credibility when you're leading a technical group. But the business training from the executive MBA and the Master of Management then allows you to relate to the customers, whether the customers are private sector or whether the customers are in a public sector. So that bridging provides that intersection to be able to translate technology into value, which at the end of the day, there's no point making really great technology if it's not going to be consumed by the level of people that you're targeting it to be for.
Nice. Okay. So coming back to those smart city initiatives, what are the most impactful projects you have done there in Toronto, and what were the outcomes? Something tangible. Yeah.
You know, when I took over the CTO role, and a lot of people would think that the role of a technology executive, specifically from a city lens, is that you have to be deeply technical. You have to be technical, but you also have to be a technologist. And the differentiation for me is understanding the impact, as I mentioned, the technology will bring. So it would be surprising to people, but one of the most impactful things was building in terms of what we call the digital infrastructure strategic framework. And people can look it up. It was a set of principles where the private sector in engaging in Toronto would have a set of guidelines as such that would allow them in terms of the interaction of technology. Because at the time, there was a very conversations about how are you protecting the data, what is the role of government, etc. So we formed a principles, which include that any technology that was going to be released in Toronto had to demonstrate social, economic, and environmental impact, had to ensure that it was equitable and inclusive, privacy and secure. In the context of government in that part of the world, and certainly in some parts of the world, democracy and transparency, we also ensured that the technology had So that was very impactful because it was fully adopted by the elected official, by council and the mayor, which set a real foundation from a guidelines infrastructure. So that is because at the end of the day, you can jump to the tech, but if the tech isn't having trust and confidence in the public service, people aren't going to feel that the city specifically is adopted. And then one of the most impactful actual implementation, it was around the pandemic, and I would be on various conversations where the cost of broadband, in this particular case, the cost of high-speed internet was very high. So we collaborated with the private sector to essentially build internet connectivity off apartments, having the cellular towers come off that. And the government then created that sort of Wi-Fi service for communities for 12 months in free. Why was that important? It created a PPP, private-public partnership, which was also hitting the community. So we worked with the hardware provider, one of the large hardware providers of the equipment. We worked with a telecommunications company in Canada. We then provided the role of government to enable and facilitate that environment, and then we delivered it. So that was just a tangible piece, which was, again, trying to ensure that we would provide internet to people who could not afford it. It wasn't accessibility. There was accessibility, but there was an affordability question as well. So that's an example of technology in a tech environment, architecting the environment to make the connectivity happen, and then having from a human lens where people can consume it and they could use it for content. And at the time, we were all at home. So there was homeschooling, etc. So that was very rewarding as a public servant.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, indeed. That was a big topic at that time. Interesting. So when you go to those projects, when you go into them, how do you overall how do you prioritize them? It doesn't work like in a company. Like we're that's why we're so excited today. It's very different, I believe, that decision making. So how do you prioritize the technologies or the projects? And I guess there are budget constraints as well in the city, not only in companies. And then there are decision makers. That probably looks totally different from a corporate structure. How does that work?
100%. So there's an architectural principle I have, both from technical architecture as well as business architecture. I'll speak on, and then political architecture. So I use a lot of methodologies on various other comments. So I use the PEST, the political, the economic, the social, the technology. I use the RACE, who's responsible, accountable, consultant. All these methodologies are very well known. But what I really did also, one methodology that in the pandemic I formed was my 5S principles. So let me just start off on. First, it starts with the regulations or the guidelines. When you're working in public service, unlike the private sector, it's not about profit and loss. It's about enabling the environment to serve people. So first thing I do is what are the regulations or the guidelines, or the regulations or the guidelines need to be evolved. And we had examples in Toronto where we had to evolve it very quickly because people weren't coming into the office. So that I'll give an example whereby we had to evolve the policy to ensure that if you wanted burial licenses, for example, with the regulations, it wasn't written in a digital format. So we quickly had to work with the city clerk office to change the regulation. And then we allowed people to do it digitally by creating applications. So the first thing that I focus on the first S is the technology stable? Is this technology going to provide a stability? Then the second S, is it going to scale? And Toronto had 2.9 million people. The third S is that the solution was going to be integrated. And the reason why that is important is that I had lots of emails or lots of letters about how technology could fix this, but we would come out of the pandemic at some stage. So the integration, the APIs were very, very important. There's no point bringing more technology where it can't speak or share data. So the third S is solution integration. The fourth S was security, ensuring that cybersecurity, not just physical security, and that links into privacy as well. And then was it sustainable? Infrastructure as a service, on the cloud, platform as a service, software. So the 5S was the way that I defined in terms of how to lead a team, a large team. Then it started to look at what is the PES, what is the political angle. You're working with elected officials. There's a lot of pressure. They have constituency. So managing in terms of the communication, the direction is very important. And then the economics, the budget. And I want to separate budget from finance, because budget is about looking from an accounting. See, how do we now work with the private sector where we can have private sector supporting us at that stage, whether it was through donations or contributions, to help us meet our goals. So that's the economics of the PES. The politics is what the politicians are looking for. Politics is about, there was 44 divisions. I had 44 colleagues in executive roles. Then the social was about building the relationship. I built up relationships 2 years in Toronto with the telecommunications industry, with various industry, and then the tech. So if you notice, the tech comes at the end. You've got to build up these pieces, political acumen, you've got to build up economics, you have to have relationships. Then you deliver at the tech in terms of there in a rapid format. Then I incorporated the 5S, which spoke to inside my team. What is the methodology of decision making? Because the CTO and the leadership can't be everywhere. And then having a very strong architectural blueprint. It starts with regulations, then it builds with telecommunications, ICT, then it builds essentially where the data is there. So that I am a very strong methodology, architectural brain. That's how my brain works. And once you've sort of socialized that in terms of culture and leadership and diversity and equity, the system will run because people now have a set direction. So that's the sort of way that I governed a very large government. Toronto is very large in terms of Canada, but it was successful in the time, certainly I was there, based on what we were dealing with at the time with the pandemic.
Interesting. Okay. It's very political, I would say. Well, it is in companies as well. Yeah, but very different indeed. Okay, maybe we can talk a bit about community engagement. So how are the different parties engaged? How are community members heard? How are their voices taken into the whole process when making decisions? I guess there are ideas coming from communities in the city. I could imagine, how does that information flow? Or is this all centrally decided?
Yeah, and when you walk in a democracy, you have to be very sensitive, because at the end of the day, the elected officials have been elected because they are representing their constituency. So what we did was, in this case, in Toronto as the example, using that as a use case, before the pandemic, we started doing public consultations with developing the digital infrastructure strategic framework, which is the guidelines I mentioned of those principles. So we had town halls, we brought the community into City Hall, we had forums, we created breakout session. What is important to the community? Safety, ensuring they're secure, homelessness, poverty. What does that center around? It centers around accessibility of data. It centers about how does the private sector. So we did that. Then in the pandemic, we took that online. So before we generated that digital infrastructure strategic framework, and people can certainly go on the internet and find that it's a public document that can be shared. It's called the DISF. It came from the community at all different levels of the community, from diverse communities, from different communities, so that when we went to council with the elected officials to get it adopted, we had confidence and evidence to say that we had done stakeholder engagement. That is very, very important. Now, of course, 2.9 million people, you may not capture every single voice, but you want representation. So that's one aspect. Another piece is that through the PES that I mentioned of the S, you need relationships in academia, you need relationships across the whole ecosystem, so that you could have voices that are coming from different underrepresented groups. Some groups may not necessarily feel they have a voice. So that was something that was very, very predominant. So I created a team, a specific team. And what we actually did was that we changed the name from Smart City. I used to have a team, we called it Connected Community, because we didn't want the word smart city, which is a technical name based on history that was formed. And so what it meant is that we were able to reach aspects of the community, because we were saying we want to connect you with its telecommunications. We want to connect you to services that government is listening. And that then brings trust and confidence. So stakeholder engagement, various forums, it depends on your city. Some people would fill surveys, some people want to have in person, some people want to have virtual. We created the various different channels. And then we segregate your personas. What is the persona? And now, when you're starting to look into transferring to other parts of the world, there's personas for visitors, residents, investors. Once you create the persona, you can now target where are those communities and what is the voice of the customer. For those people who know Lean Six Sigma, you're always talking on the private sector. What is the voice of the customer? And the customer in this sense, in government, is the community. And you've got to go and find them in the space that they feel most comfortable in. So,
okay, nice. So, how about challenges? So, what was the biggest challenge when you think back to your time in Toronto? What was the biggest challenge you faced there implementing solutions in the city?
44 heads in a city. Toronto is a large component of the Canadian GDP. It's the center of a lot of the economic aspects. It's the biggest population in Canada. And you have 44 divisions representing 2.9 million people. So imagine trying to bring everybody and to agree. So that's where methodologies are very important. So that's challenging, who's responsible. So I'm a big racy one, as I mentioned, to say it's really great, but your role is the consultation. And then another challenge is that with that, through legacy, technology debt, technology silos, how do you bring all those systems together? So as I mentioned, I'm very big on enterprise architecture, digital enterprise architecture, city architecture. So I formed something called an Enterprise Architectural Review Board, EARB. So we may all have opinion, but at the end of the day, we have to integrate. And then that Enterprise Architectural Review Board is a combination of within the 44 divisions, they are into what at the time was sectioned together. So there was a group that dealt with the hard services, water, solid waste. There was a group that dealt with the soft services, community. There was a group that dealt with the corporate services, which is where I was. So we would have champions of each of those sponsored at the executive level. They would sit on that EARB, Enterprise Architectural Review Board, and that would be then the board that helped us build an integrated architecture, especially as we were trying to, within the 5S principle, scale, stabilize, scale, integrate, make sure it's secure. So your biggest challenge is essentially trying to bring people together in good conversations, but have very discipline in how those conversations transition to action. We can talk all day. That's great. But at the end of the day, you've got to deliver under a certain budget and under a certain pressure. The things I've just described was the way we managed it. And then during Toronto, as a pandemic, we formed divisional operational centers. I'm a great believer that certainly titles are important, but you get some of the best innovation in any organization at different levels of the organization. So we selected people that it wasn't based on title. Our division operational center was based on what expertise. I'll give an example. The person who led our desktop deployment, you can imagine the pandemic hit, everybody left in March at that stage, in that time. But our manager who was leading that area was very knowledgeable about on the ground what the desktops and the actual access in terms of phones, what was needed. So she was a part of the divisional operational center because we needed her input, not because her title was a manager, but she had 100 people. She knew in terms of each of the divisions. So as the leader, you have to enable and facilitate an environment that finds what are the subject matter experts and how do you bring them into the decision process. So being a member of that EARB, Enterprise Architectural Review Board, the construct of the people sat on that board, whether it's title, and then giving them the authority to make decisions.
And I guess this also leads into my next question. What would be a good lesson learned from this whole undertaking you've done there? I guess that's what you already mentioned, right? Or is there another lesson learned you would like to mention?
Well, another lesson learned is as a leader, check your ego. It's not about you. It's about the people you serve. So you have to have servant leadership. And I'm just being very candid about it. But also as well, another lessons learned is that the buck stops with you. The accountability stops with you. You're not expected to know everything, but you have to create a culture. So check your ego, create great structure, methodologies, process, so people are clear of how they can make decisions. This is just leadership 101, by the way, in any sector. And also ensure you fully back and support the people you're serving, your team, the external, the internal. And the buck stops with you. If it doesn't work out well, part of failure is learning to innovate, to grow. Stand up, take it. And so in my position, I was in council regularly, whether it's being audited, whether it's being governed, etc. I have to explain. And to me, it's about, I'm the CTO, I'm the Chief Technology Officer. While I may have not been the one making this decision, the principles are set. And if a decision has gone in the direction that doesn't meet its need, then we will go lessons learned, reevaluate, come back. You have to courage and you have to be fearless. And if that's not what your personality of leadership is, certainly in technology, and you're in the middle of anything, then it's not going to be a very happy experience. So that's what I learned. And we grew together. Relationships grew together. You create other leaders. So many lessons. And part of the reason those lessons I have formed into my book, because I felt that those lessons should not just stay with me, but they should be shared globally within my book of Bridging Worlds, Technology Leadership.
I will have a look at the book.
Please do.
Nice.
If you're still listening, then you must take technology seriously. So I'd like to introduce you to our case study database. Think of it as a roadmap that can help you understand which use cases and technologies are being deployed in the world today. We have cataloged more than 9,000 case studies and are adding 500 per month with detailed tagging by industry and function. Our goal is to help you make better investment decisions that are backed by data. Check it out at the link below, and please share your thoughts. We'd love to hear how we can improve it. Thank you, and back to the show.
Okay, maybe moving on to the whole topic of data governance and privacy. It's a very big topic, and basically two topics here. Concern about data privacy. How is that addressed? And then also, how is data used? I mean, a smart city collects data, collects information. How can you make sure that it's ethically used after it's being collected and then only used by the right people?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's lots of data collected. So let's talk about the data collection. And within different governments, the first thing is understanding both the national, regional, and local regulations. Various countries have various laws, whether it's privacy laws, etc. So making sure you're adopting that in terms of the privacy aspect. So, and that's why working with the cybersecurity team in Toronto, we had a cybersecurity team, is very, very important. So follow the regulation. And if the regulations need to be evolved, be a champion of how you evolve the regulations so that the data is not identifying the individual, but it's creating that viewpoint of trust. So within the digital infrastructure strategic framework I mentioned, privacy and security was a key principle. So we made sure that through the various accountable parties that the classification of the data is accurately being done. The way the data is released, a lot of governments in city governments have open data portals. So they're releasing data to help build new economic models, new innovation, new companies, but it is not private data. It is not data that identifies Peter, Eric, Lawrence. It's data that identifies the macroeconomics. How many people are moving to the area? What is the general macro aspect? So it's having very strong skill sets of people who deal with data governance, who are very knowledgeable, making sure your data team understand the specific country, understand the regulations, and have influence to be able to either evolve the regulations. So that's on the sort of data aspects, and then govern it, measure it, comply to it, show evidence that you're complying to that. In terms of the utilization, is ensuring that the data can move. There's always a topic of AI and some of the conversations we have, but without data, there is no machine learning, generative AI, or any other forms of AI. So it's creating a single source of truth. And I've seen this more in the Middle East based on the fact that you're able to integrate better so that the data is now providing value from a customer service. So if you have economic data from all aspects of government into a centralized single source of truth, you can have a centralized dashboard, a centralized command center. You can ensure that the city operation can run. So it's separating the classification of the data, which is really focused on the public and focused on what the public needs to feel trust and confidence. The way the data is shared inside government, making sure it's following all the right appropriate cybersecurity standards, etc., ensuring you're building that component, and then making the data accessible in an open data to build new economies, new jobs, new opportunities. But the underlying foundation is built on cybersecurity and privacy and following the regulation. So that's essentially the model of how you deal with it. Because in government, it's very sensitive. I mean, it's sensitive in the private sector, but in government, it's trust and confidence of the people. And if the people don't feel that you have leadership strength and you understand how to keep them safe, you're that piece. So on the ethical part, it's then demonstrating that your data is going to be for good. It's making the economy, the community. And that's why in the principles we had any tech that's come in that involves aspects needs to fall under how is it demonstrating socially it's going to be better for the people? How is it demonstrating economically and also environmentally within a privacy and security foundation?
Very interesting. Yeah, indeed. I mean, data security here is something that comes from the government and not from a company. You can avoid a product of a certain company if you feel it's not safe or collecting your personal data. That is something you don't want to happen to a government. That's absolutely right. Yeah, it's a different level, I would say. Yeah.
It's a different level. The public service, I spent 5 years in Toronto and I really had an education of how it's a difficult role because it's not just working on a profit and loss and meeting market share and revenue. You're dealing with sensitive information to keep people feeling trust and confidence in you. That's your mandate. If you have no trust and confidence, you can't be a public servant. So people need to feel that, and you have to demonstrate that through some of the things I've discussed.
Yeah, and indeed, it's one of the pillars, right? So it comes first. Security and data governance is a question that has to be answered first before anything else happens, I would think, right? If a solution is not fulfilling the requirements at that level, then it will not proceed any further.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. I get a few questions left here. So first of all, in your opinion, do you think what does the future hold for smart cities? Obviously, things are evolving, but what is your idea? What is your opinion here? And what do you think is the emerging technology out of all this? What will be the leading technology?
Yeah, I think that also the future branding becomes important sometimes. I mean, I think that people need to, number one, define their city with the pulse of their city. Some people call it the intelligence of the city, the resilience of the city. So while smart city is a broad name coined by the private sector many years ago, the conversation at the leadership level needs to be a lot of all these things. We are certainly making the city smarter, but the smarter means about data and technology. So data being is that how can you make informed decisions to run the city, to create environment? Technology, how are you bringing the new technologies, either to innovate, to test, to run, and then to scale? Because sometimes you need the experimentation to learn and create in that. So I think the future is bright. But what I do think is that a city has lots of potential, will be smart. My experience based on various years is that it's actually the governance of how the city is being governed that will dictate how smart that city becomes. Because the governance means essentially as some of the things I've explained, not just the technology governance, the data governance, but as well the governance within the city, within the business area. So if you're going to have a command center, you all have to agree as leaders that you're going to share that data and it's meeting the principles. So a city has smart, and the smart is not just technology. It could be business process reengineering. So when people say to you, is your city smart? The next conversation is that if your city isn't smart, is it the opposite, which is dumb? No, it's really what it's saying is that can the city help me essentially have a good experience? When I arrive in a city, how is my experience based on data and technology? So that's the aspects that I see necessarily of smart cities. Now, in terms of technology, I think that some of the technology that I think is really, really interesting, which also is going to really come to certain aspects is biometrics. I find very interesting because it's the validation of data. I see that a lot in airports. I've mentioned before is that to me, I judge a city by the first point of entry. What is the experience I have when I land in the city, especially if I'm coming from overseas? So you see that now with metadata being pre-approved because I want the experience. So come from an experience, a UX, and then ensure that the data is shared, it's worked on the privacy. So biometrics, a lot of the biometrics technologies are becoming very prevalent. And then, of course, you've got the drones, you've got the ability of industrial Internet of Things, IoTs. It's all about the collection. So I see the technology less about invention, more about innovation that takes the baseline and continuously improve it. Robotics process or automation. But I do think one technology that I would really state that for years I've been watching, it just needs to have an economic model that is attractive enough to scale is quantum computing. I think if we think of what generative AI can do right now, wait till really, really supercomputers start to look at quantum computing, and the rapid pace of generating things is just lights away. So I would say quantum computing is one that is really going to ensure when you look at artificial intelligence in the future and what it is going to interact with us as humans in an ethical way, quantum computing is one that I'm really excited with over the next few years as it becomes more commercialized.
Okay.
Lawrence, a question here. So, first of all, I love that point about the airport being kind of your first touch point with the city. I was in Singapore a couple months ago, and you get off the airport, you get off the plane, you go, you scan a QR code, you register, and then you just walk through a turnstile, looks at your face, and 5 minutes later, you're waiting for a taxi. It's so pain-free. There's no lines, right? Because there's 50 turnstiles. You're just, you're right through. And it's such it's a first impression, right? It's like going into an interview, you give a perfect first impression. Rest of the conversation's much easier, right? And, and you think, well, why doesn't every city do this? And so this comes to my question. I see this a lot from organizations. I don't know what the solution is, and I'm curious how you're thinking about it, that you often have a situation, I'm thinking about it now from AI, but I think any digital technology could apply, where you have this maybe a top-down assessment that this is important to do. So the city leaders or the corporate leaders say, yes, we need to consider this technology. Bottom up, you have a lot of smart people in the organization who are saying, yeah, okay, let's try this out. I think we can use it here. And they're trying different things and they're generating ideas. But then somehow the technology never scales, right? You're using it in certain areas, but you never get that value where it just becomes a normal part of the operating procedure. And I think this turnstile is a kind of an example where everybody can go to Singapore, they can experience it, but nonetheless, nobody else is using it, right? Why isn't every airport in the world using this? There's already a blueprint. And my sense is that it's kind of the middle of the organization. How do you create systematic adoption of a technology, changing processes, training people, changing thought processes around who should be doing what work and so forth? How have you addressed this either at Toronto or at other organizations that you've been part of in terms of the kind of the systematic organizational adoption of technology?
So let me take a position here. May seem a little bit controversial as things, is that the world these days is being driven digitally. If you look at the top 100 organizations, they're technology companies. If you look at the way that the world is moving, whether it's even energy companies, they're all tech companies. The position of the leadership at the top is having to ensure you have a grounding of skills. So one of the reasons, as I said, I did an MBA wasn't because that I needed to do it, was because I need to understand business. So if you have tech and technologists, and that's the difference between technical. If you have technologists who have a business mind, which links to culture, they will find out where the bottleneck is. And whether it's in the middle of the organization, and then it's leadership. You have to drive in. So when I was in Toronto, I was in those meetings at the Divisional Operational Center. My job was to guide. I didn't have to come up with the solution of how great the tech, but I needed to understand the culture that was stopping the tech in expanding, or the culture that was inhibiting us to move integration. And if you as leaders in executive positions do not empower, your audience needs to hear this, if you do not empower organization, and I've talked a whole series of things, the methodologies I use, it's that the manager now feels empowered, And the CTO or the CEO or the most senior person, they know they have the trust and confidence. Here's the guardrails. Here's the area you can walk in. And if it's an issue, where's the escalation? Where is it coming to seek support? But if you have bureaucracy, as in there's big organizations need that, I get that. But if a junior person is saying it's the business process that's the problem, the tech can do all of this, but we're not having quality requirements. There's lots of methodologies. There's agile. People have used different methodologies. There's sprint. But if the leaders aren't willing to get sometimes a bit deep, to help use their position, their titles, to create that culture, it's culture, to say, no, listen to the manager. So let me give you an area that I used to look at. When I used to go into meetings and I would have this A4 sheet of paper and I would look at where are the conversations in executive meetings with your team. And sometimes you find the most senior titles are not the ones that have the influence. It's maybe somebody in a junior title, but they just need the sponsorship. So if the executive can say, I sponsor Eric, who is in this position, he will make those decisions with my sponsorship because his background is X, Y, and he's good at robotics, he's good at there, then I will create a forum, whether it's a steering committee, whatever's your governance culture, and we will drive this. And once we provide the POC or the pilot, then the mandate comes from the top that we're going to scale. And we scale it in incremented from a risk assessment. So if you're a big company, there's bureaucracy, there's regulations, there's compliance. But if the leaders in their titles aren't sponsoring, you will never scale. You will never scale because why is the junior person going to take the risk when they don't have the authority? But if they have sponsorship, now if you create that trickle down, the CEO, the president, the VP, the directors, once you've created that culture of all the way down, people feel emboldened. And that's what happened in Toronto. There's no way. I had a team of 800 odd people. I had a large budget. I cannot on my own recognize how to solve the problems of everywhere. But I had to create the culture to say, if this is the right tech, that's why the 5S principles were so successful, because my team would just, at any level, would just check off the 5S and says, yep, we can show it hits this 5S. We're going to try to adopt this to scale. So that's my piece. And certainly I'm sharing that. I'm not saying it will work in every organization, but it's about leadership and culture. And if you don't lean in and you don't have the ability to understand the pest and all those things, technology leaders are essentially running organizations. They may not be called the CEO, but they should be on the table. Them with human capital or human resources. It's people and technology. And that's what drives the change and allows you to scale, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I was in a workshop the other day, and I didn't think about it in this way. But one of the more junior people, he put up his hand and he said, "Okay, we're here in China, and we're trying to drive this smart factory, ambition of really being identified as what is the World Economic Forum lighthouse factory, right?" And so they're trying to drive this initiative, and headquarters is now starting to put up some barriers because headquarters is saying, no, we're working on this thing, and all of a sudden the guys in China are starting to push, and they're duplicating our effort. And he said, well, what do we do? This is headquarters. And the president was sitting down there in the workshop, and he said, you escalate to me, right? There's going to be fights. We're trying to do something ambitious. People are going to push back. It's going to happen. Get used to it. If you feel like we're doing important work and somebody's putting a barrier, not because it's best for the company, because it's best for them, right? Because they personally are feeling threatened, escalate to me and I'll have the conversation. And I hadn't thought about it in that systematic way that you've just outlined here, but I think that's what he was doing, right? He was trying to educate the organization that I'm supporting you, you're empowered, but there has to be that communication from the bottom up also to say, hey, boss, I need your help on this one, right? To push it through.
And to build upon that, so one of the things I did in Toronto was that you always want to have access to the people. So my office formed 3 levels. So every week I would meet my senior leaders, like the deputy chief technology officers. We did that on a weekly basis. Then essentially every month I would meet those at the director level. That was the title structure, right? And it's communication, making sure. Then I would then meet essentially the managers and then the supervisors. So within a 6 month, and then I would have a town hall. So within a 6-month cycle with a team of 800 people, in that example, I'm constantly getting feedback loop all the time through my office. Lawrence, we tried this. This is being blocked. Okay, then I would send a champion in. understand where it's being blocked, and then can we scale this? Can we put, whether it's a process, a procedure, like what is a committee? So you're constantly problem solving, troubleshooting, and looking at a way to release the bottleneck. To release. But if that's not coming from the top, and I mean the most top in the organizational, with authority, that's the key. What you've mentioned, the president has the authority to go to the headquarters, the HQ, and deal with those battles. And there are going to be battles because there's sometimes a political agenda. That's okay. But if the leadership at the most serious is absent from that or doesn't lean into that, the bottom, as in those in a different position, will not come and share because they feel that it will be dead on arrival. They will not be comfortable to come and share, like nothing's going to happen. We've escalated 2 or 3 things. So that's just examples that I have had in my leadership journey.
Would this also be the advice you would give to other cities looking to embark on digital transformation?
Absolutely. There's nothing like the lessons learned and the scars to make you educated. And there's plenty of that. Absolutely. Whether you're a city of course, it's more complex on the governance when you're a city of millions. Don't get me wrong. It's more complex within democracy because everybody has an opinion. But that's what I would advise. And I've seen it successful I've lived in many places, as I said, many countries. The leadership trail and the culture, what are you trying to build? At least if it's not successful, you can pinpoint why. Let's not waste our time on trying to do something if it's not these barriers that we don't have the authority to change. Accept it and then document it to say this is the reasons why we're not going to change. You often have cities that say we want innovation or we want certain aspects. Everybody has innovation in them. Innovation is thinking differently. It's culture, new ideas. Innovation is not just tech. If a process has been around since the 50s or 60s, chances are that process or procedure or regulation is not going to scale. It's not. The world is changing too fast. So I would definitely say it's an advice from my perspective of my experience, and you can then customize it to your city.
Great. Thank you very much, Lawrence Eta. Do you have any more questions? Eric, from your end?
Well, Lawrence, maybe as a wrap up, it would be, we've been talking a lot about your past and you have a fascinating past. I think the future is probably going to be equally fascinating. So can you share a little bit about, what are you working on today? What does the future look like for you?
The future with one of the cities that we've worked on, we've just completed about a year ago a digital strategy that has been highly supported and endorsed. It's a very ambitious strategy. So for me, I'm very passionate about integrated digital strategies. So sometimes you have the technology that it's not integrated to the data. So really ensuring that cities build architecture and strategy. That's really good. So right now, one of the areas that I'm really interested in is how do you, for cities, the foundation is something called the CDE, the Common Data Environment. It's a digital twin. The digital twin is very important because once you digitize and twin the city, you get a representation in 3D visualization that allows you to make decision making, especially when you are having return on investment. So the digital twin is a very exciting opportunity to really take that city and look at it in that 3D, explain to people, give people the touch and the feel when they can see it. So that's really interesting. A command center is very interesting, or the heartbeat of the city. That's the control of everything. You deal with that also in health areas. You looked at the pandemic. Imagine having a centralized command center where you can look at infectious disease and you can anticipate. And then you're putting AI on top and then let the machines do what they do. So that's very, very exciting. The collection of data through the modernization of drones. I know that you're in Asia. I'm fascinated with what's happening over in Asia, where you actually see drones being used to deliver packaging to the citizens. So imagine now I order prescription, I order medicine, I order pharmacy. Do I now have to come to you? Let the drone drop it in a central sort of area whereby everybody can go and collect. So there are many use cases of applications. I'm very excited on the data, on the aspects of twinning the city. I've talked about quantum computing. Quantum computing is going to be really big for R&D. Imagine having a fast computer that can integrate all city data and say, this is the new economies in the next 20 or 30 years that you want to think of. It will lead to education. It will lead into new sectors. So there's so much to be done, but those are some of the areas, Eric, that I would say that make me excited about the future. And also, as well as providing thought leadership. Part of this forum of being on this podcast is sharing the thought leadership, the globe, and also, working with various stakeholders to sort of advise them about this is the experience, but this is where the path is going forward. That's some of the things that I'm excited for the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Lawrence. I was listening to a presentation from a team from McKinsey a few days ago, and they were doing this research on past 20 years on what industries created a lot of value, and then the next 20 years, what are the industries that are positioned? And what really struck me was, the past 20 years, it was kind of pure digital, like e-commerce, social media, it was these pure digital industries. But the ones in the next 20 are some of the ones you just mentioned, right? That are physical. They're digital integrated into drones, into vehicles, into city hardware. And I think for a lot of people, this is going to be much more tangible, right? It's integrating the digital into the physical world that we're living in. I mean, this is called the IoT Spotlight podcast. So, of course, I'm very excited about this next generation of digitalization. Lawrence, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for your time. It was a great conversation. Thank you to your audience. I hope they have got some information and can take it and utilize it in their journeys.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@IoT1.com.